Hey guys and girls, Bored now back with you, and on this video I will be talking about the fourth episode of them from Amazon Prime. It is called Day 6, so we'll be going into full spoilers from the beginning, and it's another strong episode. I would say it's definitely getting better and better, this series. And it starts with the fallout really from the previous night and the actions of the neighbours, where Betty basically encouraged and manipulated her husband and a group of his friends to set fire to the lawn with that racist message. And we find out the next morning, and that's not the only thing they've been doing, because the family wake up, and again, I think credit for the use of music, because it's very effective in making the point. It's the use of Sippity Doodah, that sort of upbeat, flashy sort of song. And it's as Henry gets up in the morning and he comes outside and sees all this racist sort of stuff on his lawn. And it's a very, ironic sort of use of music in that sense. It's almost, yeah, this is the opposite of what Henry is feeling. So it's very well done. So he comes out, sees the message on the lawn, also sees a bunch of like black faces, black toys. Now again, because of the tone of the show at times, it's possible some of that might be in his head, but certainly he's confronted with like one of like a sort of a spring type toy, and that's got like a black face, and just being confronted with it, and it puts Henry on edge as he goes to work, and the whole family wake up to it, and it's obviously very traumatizing, not just for the adults but especially for the kids. So Lucky actually, when Henry's gone, she actually confronts Betty about it and says, what is this? And Betty says it's a start, basically. And battle lines are drawn in this episode between the two of them. And Lucky's like, well, come on, I've got kids and all that. And Betty tries to turn it around on her and say, well, that's your fault. It's this happens because of your reaction. And tells them really the best thing for them to do is to leave the neighbourhood, otherwise things will only get worse. So she basically makes threats, and from now on, if you don't take action, if you don't leave the neighbourhood, then I'm gonna up the game, so to speak. Things will never be this good for you again, as she puts it, and sort of talks about, yeah, just stuff like that. And yeah, then Lucky basically stands her ground and makes it clear that they're not going anywhere, and sort of kind of waves to the neighbours in like a sarcastic, friendly way, as a way to sort of confront the situation and put a brave face and sort of rub it in their face, because they're like gathering round and trying to make out, oh, Betty, you're right, that sort of thing. So on that exchange, certainly Lucky gets the last sort of laugh and a big sort of FU. Now I'll talk about actually the Ruby storyline and her at school, because in one of the previous episodes we saw her starting to talk to this white girl called Doris. And in this episode, there's a reveal about their friendship, but they start talking more, start hanging out more, kind of like regular kids. So teenagers, they become friends, and they basically sneak down to like this basement or something in the school, and they watch like this jock making out, getting quite raunchy with a girl, and they just watch, and it's just teenage stuff. They sort of have a laugh and a giggle, and then sort of run off together. So we see them starting to build more of a friendship. But the turn here is that Denise appears to be imaginary. She appears to be something which Ruby as sort of made up in her head, because at one point they're in like the closet sort of hanging out, and the janitor like sort of bursts in, and he gives Ruby a tongue lashing because he's African American as well, and he's kind of like, yeah, your parents didn't pay for you to go to this school for this. They have like bigger plans for you. And it's a clever scene because at first you think he's like ticking her off as a way because she's hanging out with a white girl sort of thing, and maybe calling her up on the fact that this white girl has bad intentions for you. But actually, that's obviously turned around in the next instance, because what happens is Ruby moves on, and the janitor just closes the door on Doris, and you see Doris just laying there, but there's like a crack in her face and something like unnatural, and it's obvious that the janitor doesn't see her and just shuts the door. So it's obvious then Doris isn't there. She's not real. Ruby has invented her in her head. So I sort of like that. Obviously, it could have been interesting to have had an actual friend for Ruby, but this makes the point even more because I think basically it's like she's daydreaming, having this fantasy of having a normal life, of having a friend, a white friend, someone where, yeah, like she's being accepted more by white culture and by the kids around her at school. So that's why she's sort of created Doris in her head. And I mean, before that, it's also like there's a vibe where there's an attraction between them, like Doris is attracted to Ruby and possibly the other way around. So I guess that just adds to the fantasy as well, and maybe getting into this idea that Ruby could be gay, basically. So exploring that angle as well, which is interesting. So that's really good stuff. A lot of the meaty stuff in the episode is with Lucky because she goes to Helen, and I guess despite her putting a brave face on it against Betty earlier, she wants to leave the neighbourhood. She wants to move. Now, of course, she's never been as enthusiastic about it as Henry has been, and she wants to sort of move. And Helen reminds her of like the lease agreement and stuff, so that kind of binds them in. But she also says, you've got nothing to worry about because the way the market's going is that more African American families are going to be moving into the neighbourhood. It's becoming a trend, and you won't be alone for long, essentially. So Helen, who I think is a reasonably sympathetic character, or at least has been set up as such, is kind of in a bit of a bind. But she does mention to Lucky that there's another woman in the neighbourhood or nearby who's African American. So Lucky goes to see her, Mrs. Johnson her name is, and this is when the episode does take a weird and disturbing turn because Miss Johnson talks about experiencing the man in black, the man with the black hat, same as Lucky experienced in the previous episode on the bus. And we also see that her husband is disabled. He's lost both legs, but there's talk of the children, but where is the children? The question becomes, and Mrs. Johnson just becomes hysterical. I think at one point she's like telling Lucky that basically you just need to blend into the neighbourhood. You just need to, go about your way and not cause a stir. But then there's this question mark, as I said, over where's the children, and you get this heightened sort of sinister scene where the husband is like moving about and laughing like evilly, and where's the children, and it cuts to like the oven, and they don't actually show you, but at least from Lucky's point of view, it looks as though the children are in the oven and have been cooked, so that Mrs. Johnson has killed her own children, and this obviously sets Lucky off. And later on, when Henry comes home, she's sort of frantically telling him about what happened and Mrs. Johnson, and she persuades Henry to go over to the house, and it's totally different when they get inside. That like they burst in and the house looks completely different. It's a much cleaner sort of house. The kitchen looks completely different, and also the husband. I mean, he's still disabled. He's still in a wheelchair, but he isn't doing anything. He's like not talking, not moving about like she obviously witnessed him doing. He's a lot more subdued. Mrs. Johnson says he can't talk, so again raises question: is this stuff all in Lucky's head, or is there something to it? Is there something going on in the neighbourhood, unnaturally, supernaturally? And certainly you could look at it either way. Maybe sometimes a cross between the two. Another couple plots in the episode is that it ends, by the way, with Lucky and Henry going home, and they have sex, and I think that's only significant because just the feel of the scene is that Lucky's like the dominant one, like she's taking control again, like we almost seen, but maybe it's just meant to be that, yeah, it's an intimate scene following what they've been through in the previous scene, but I think it's definitely shot in a way where Lucky's more aggressive, more the dominant figure, like taking control of. And Henry's just going along with it just because his wife needs a bit of like comfort and support. So there's that. Now at Henry's work, there's an interesting scene because there's like the appearance of like an important CEO, like or investor, one of the two, but an important figure in the company anyway. And there's all this like hoopla where like the boss doesn't want to introduce him to Henry because Henry's a black engineer, and the guy in question is expecting a white person to be engineer. So there's this scene where there's like, because it's like at a function, so there's this performance on stage by this band, and before it, the the important guy, sort of comes on and says that this year for the bonus for the project, this particular project, I'm gonna give like a pay rise to the engineer of this project, not realizing that it's an African American. So there's actually a good like moment of empowerment for Henry later on, because he's told by his boss at one point that, I didn't tell him that you were African American. And again, he's being rather sort of crafty and in his own way, he's like using the politics, but he's just saying, I think for now it'll be best if you don't like take the project or something, or you don't, because I didn't tell him, it's awkward, so don't take the pay, sort of thing. And Henry then, I think just as an FU sort of thing, goes over and introduces himself to the guy, just to like rub it in his boss's face. So that's a pretty good scene. That's a good moment for Henry. And the other scene in it, the other sort of important scene, which is really sort of eerie and just strange, but again is adding a bit more depth to Betty, is that she goes over to see her parents at one point. So it's the first appearance of her parents. And from the moment she walks in and starts interacting with them, you can tell like they have a terrible relationship, and that they haven't seen her in ages. It makes that clear. And you get the impression that they basically have funded her lifestyle, and that they're the ones who sort of pay for her like living expenses and that, and probably the main reason why she can afford to live in the neighbourhood she can, because I think there's a line later that makes it clear that her and Clark are struggling financially, because he's been doing all this overtime, and Betty makes this remark about, yeah, you couldn't like bring any of that money home. You couldn't be making extra money, sort of thing. So definitely they're meant to be struggling, and but there's all this tension with her and the parents, where the mother particularly is like surprised to see her, and like she has a comment at one point about I'd wish the new never come around again. So they definitely don't have any sort of a relationship, or not a very good one. And then the scene takes a really creepy turn, because they're talking about the father giving her a bath, and it's just really obviously icky and unsettling, and maybe prods at this idea that there's been abuse in the past. And again, like a lot of scenes in the show, it's very sort of surreal and very atmospheric, but just something very moody and unsettling about it. It's another really effective scene, but another one that sort of puts you on edge. And it's again more background on Betty, so I think that's important. And I think maybe than some of her anxieties and some of her rage and just sort of how messed up she is comes from the parents. I think you can definitely see them. This is what the scene's getting at, but there's sort of like this weird exchange where the mother's like, "I have a feeling you came over here for something," almost like she's saying, because Betty like asks for a check, so it's almost like she's saying something different, something other than yeah, just the money. And it gets to this point where Betty's like, "Can just please give me the check and I'll leave." And it has like a bit where like they're actually the father's running the bath for her, and she's sitting on the bed, and she like just bursts out after that, just like leaves randomly. But there you have it. So that's the episode. Another really good episode. Another like strong episode. I think this is the episode where it gets mentioned as well. Then Lucky and Henry lost a baby in the past. So definitely some dark history for them when they were living back in Carolina. So sure it's going to get into that. But there you have it. That's my thoughts on them. Episode 4 of the first season. If you've been watching along, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll be back with more TV reviews soon. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.